Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Shared State, curated by Jordan Busher and Natalie Lanise. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist Dragana Crnjak. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function and ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there might be fluctuation or someone might freeze up. Thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, welcome, Dragna.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you everyone who are joining us today. As Kat mentioned, my name is Dragana Crnjak. I am artist and educator. I live in Youngstown, Ohio. I've been teaching at Youngstown State University since 2006, which was the reason I moved to Youngstown. I'm going to share a lot of images today. This really was a meaningful reflection on my work that I appreciate opportunity to look back. We just talked about complexity and kind of beauty of that to look back. So about, I would say, past 25 years since my family immigrated to United States. I'm going to share a lot of bodies of work, so bear with me, maybe talk a little fast to get through all of this. So I'm going to start here. So I'm trying to go to I have to use the arrow. I didn't know. I was born in a small town Doboj in Bosnia. This was a part of former Yugoslavia at the time. And my earliest childhood memories are really tied to these two locations you see here. One was the town I grew up in, went to school, and the other was village where my grandmother lived and where I spent, I think, every summer of my childhood. I really, when I think back of my homeland, I think of this village first, even though I just spent summers there. But I loved going to this place. It was a place of total freedom and wonder and play, like very amazing place to grow in. I had a very happy childhood, great family. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked as a doctor. I had a younger brother, but they were very supportive family for my artistic development, especially my father, who worked as a doctor, but he really was a poet. He was a writer. He wanted to study poetry, but he wasn't really supported in that attempt. So I think when time came, it was obvious I really loved to draw, and this is something I wanted to do. He really kind of went steps ahead to give me the wind in the back and really support. We grew up with his poetry. He published books while he was working as doctor. He really was always surrounded by other writers. And I think this kind of love for language and narratives, I think, was embedded in me in an early age. Then my high school time came and the Civil War erupted. And this was major disruption for everyone who lived in Bosnia at the time. In my mind, this is what high school is for me. Kind of high school equals war. I'm living through war really embedded a deep sense of fragmentation and deep sense of impermanence and fragility of place, of home. So my family immigrated in 1997, 2 years after Civil War ended, these were first paintings I was painting that really referenced village I grew up in. But the sense of place and sense of location and love for landscape really stayed consistent in my work, and it's a sort of like skeleton of it. Um, and I still recognize the same kind of horizon or the depth of field that is persistent. My early education was very formal. I was lucky to attend preparatory school in Belgrade, where we focused heavily on observation and analysis, anatomy. Really working on large scale figure was a great experience because it took a lot of time to work and erase and kind of fix and work on these, and really embedded strong love for observation. I think drawing stayed as a core to my practice to this day, and I think the drawing is the main structure before even color or surface come. When I think earliest influences that shaped maybe my sensibility or aesthetics, that works that really made impact on me emotionally, psychologically, I love the movies by Andrei Tarkovsky, Russian director. The poetry of his films, like really beautiful sense of for lighting and space. He studied painting, so his films were very painterly. And then the painting on a side that you see here by Marc Chagall was, for some reason, one of those paintings I could stare for hours, and I kept going back to the lighting, the space, the warmth. Reflecting back on these really made me realize, wow, these really kind of very important. And Cezanne and Giacometti were artists that I still relearn and look back for their blurring of figure-ground relationship and this sort of appearing of the image rather than depicting like actual space is something I still find extremely relevant. Coming to United States, I attended Myers School of Art. I was very lucky to be in an environment that was so incredibly supportive. I had amazing faculty who were all and who still are practicing artists. I just went to Don Harvey's exhibition in Cleveland. He's 80 plus and painting every day. All the faculty, like very dedicated, serious artists that showed me a lot and really were extremely supportive. Artists that stuck to my influence at that time, sorry, I'm gonna go back, were John Mitchell, Cy Twombly, Helen Frankenthaler. There was this, love for the visual language mark making, but also like deep emotional resonance. That really was what I was drawn to the most. Finishing undergrad, I moved to graduate program at Virginia Commonwealth University. I studied painting and printmaking. And these 2 years of grad program I think of as really golden time of my career. Golden time of experimentation, complete shift and questioning of everything I knew, extreme exposure, constant exposure to a lot of different artists. I discovered Charlene von Hale and Thomas Nowskowski's work really made impact. So first Matthew Ritchie's painting, and also James Hyde here with the glass box paintings really made big impact with thinking about materiality and painting as object. So for me, graduate school was total testing, experimentation of materials, making a lot of really bad work. So I kind of gave myself chance to test proximities and think of illusion and think of different surfaces. I was influenced by Asian aesthetics and mixing that with Cy Twombly, like mark making, interrupting space, thinking about different scales, really making, working also in printmaking a lot in experimental way, running these paper sheets through press about 15, 20 times. Oops, sorry. Oh my goodness. I don't know what happened there. Oh, why is this happening? I'm so sorry. This
That's
is
okay.
not me.
Are you
My
using,
computer maybe shifted. I didn't touch, but
okay.
yeah, maybe it's a good sign that I need to move faster. Um, so a lot of experiments. Oh my goodness.
Here, how about you use your mouse? Try your mouse instead of the arrow keys.
I don't have actually mouse because I'm on my Mac.
Okay.
And
Try using those
oh,
arrow keys and like pressing with your,
yeah, I that's what okay, maybe this will stay. The last year of my grad school, I was invited to be part of this exhibition that came with task to make something new that we never made. So I made my first site-specific drawing, really taking these structures on the wall, and I didn't really care so much about this drawing as finished, but I really enjoyed the process. And this drawing opened up a lot for me because I was invited to do exhibition right after to do another site-specific work. And while traveling there, I was sketching in a sketchbook with a charcoal pencil, and somehow the smudging of charcoal appeared. And it was one of those mistakes that I really recognized as a potential and kind of stayed with me for decade after. This is first installation with the charcoal, compressed charcoal on a wall. And after that, I was just drawn to charcoal as a material for its instability, for the incredible simplicity it had that really loved traveling just with a box of charcoal to places where I could transform spaces. So learning, brushing down the marks gave them these shadows that popped them up and gave illusion of three-dimensional space, making free marks versus it still keeps shifting versus like handmade drawn marks was a lot of experimentation at the time. House was an easy element for me and kind of used metaphorically as a structure that's architectural, obviously metaphoric for belonging and sense of place and identity, but also was simple enough that I could really play with it in many different configurations. Brushing in a different ways really gave me a sense to think about time and speed and sort of shifting about these forms in space. And the house was really a psychological space that carried kind of a deep sense of displacement. Now, working on, as I was moving into other site-specific works with charcoal on the wall, I was, with any materials, as we artists start exploring and you get into it, it opens up all these potentials and questions. And for me, the space between viewer and actual drawing really started to become more charged. I was very aware about how viewer would enter the space and move through the space, the lighting, the specificity of every architectural location was different and offered like really different potentials. So I was enjoying these different options, every space being different, but then getting really into awareness for the viewer and the visual narrative, I was starting to think of drawings as sort of me orchestrating this visual narrative. I really wanted viewer to come and experience the work as unfolded kind of time where you pulling in and getting closer and moving through, like kind of gave me a chance to think how these marks and colors and placement really were connecting to it. And I was very influenced by reading Phenomenology of Perception by Merleau-Ponty, French philosopher, whose book really kind of confirmed my own sensibility and the way of working, where the work, I wanted work to be experienced with our body, not just a mind and intellect and eyes. And in this book, he really talks about this active way of being in the world and experiencing the world, and where I started to think really of our bodies being covered with the senses and these invisible eyes. As you move through the space, I was very drawn to this idea of constructing something that's constantly shifting in front of you. And this, you seeing the world as always incomplete and as a fragmented kind of gave me chance to really enjoyed the process. As a finished work, these always look like kind of intentional, but it really was going with 50% in the space and kind of discovering in the location, what was really most exciting. I got my full-time teaching position in 2006. That's when I moved to Youngstown State. I'm teaching painting and drawing, and more recently mural classes that are very refreshing. And this is a big part of my career. Also, a couple years after the full-time position, I had three small children, and our family was obviously very active and dynamic. And working in a studio space became sort of had to shift. I learned how to go into studio calculating in my head while driving, like exactly what I will do. I became very efficient with my time. I was lucky to have a supporting family and really great system of support, but also the perks and, really big benefits of living in Youngstown is affordable studio space. It's a time that I could go in and work for a couple hours and then be with the family and navigate all these responsibilities. I think this drawing was unusual for me, but interesting at a time where I was structuring space that was very abstract from far, but as viewer would come closer, there were these walls that I included as navigational marks through the space. And I was thinking of wolves as animals that travel in groups and navigate kind of survival in the larger packs. As a teaching position, it's great that I had the opportunities to take sabbaticals and to travel and take travel grants that would take me to different places to research and experience a place that was really central to my work. I knew I wanted to travel to Iceland for years before this opportunity came. I structured my proposal to be there and really was interested in instability of the Icelandic landscape. So the paintings that came after the trip were really not about Iceland. They were more about abstractly activating space and thinking of the history, this in geological sense of instability and time. And the relationship between surface and the depth became something really present and constant in the work, where I started thinking with my other surfaces, I would allow these very organic, spontaneous kind of surfaces to appear with sometimes charcoal powder or watered down acrylics would come first. But then as paintings would be built, it became a little more solid and structured. My full year sabbatical was centered around visiting actually Orthodox medieval monasteries. For 6 months, my family and I traveled through these monasteries because they were deeply important to me historically, and the sense of time in these spaces was really present in every inch of the walls and every inch of the air. And again, being in the spaces, experiencing this environment was something I brought back to studio, and again, wasn't really trying to recreate the actual space of the church space, but it was the sense of time that really kind of kicked in here as one of the main elements and fascinations, I should say, with the painting. I started thinking about painting as a singular entity, and this fascination with singularity and idea of time that can shift and unfold for a viewer as they get closer to it. So a lot of process that went in was about these subtle shifts of fluid layers and referencing patterns that were recognizable and really connected to architecture of the space, but also really to me was most exciting is kind of bringing back viewer and trying to slow them down to open up like new unexpected spaces in a painting. So, what happens, it's interesting in a studio space. It's always different than what how these paintings operate outside in exhibition space. For me, studio is the meat of it all. And when I'm in a studio, it's a lot of hours of staring and a lot of hours of fixing and moving and taping and really slowly building up image. When they go into exhibition space, it's always this amazing kind of conversations that happen between the works that really is a kind of very different reality. And I love kind of being detached from them and kind of learning from my own work. From that trip to Serbia, what happened is that I was I brought all this memory of patterns and ethnic elements that I grew up with. Were very familiar with me because every female I grew up with worked with hands. There was some kind of embroidery, crocheting constantly around in my surrounding. And I became really interested in kind of revisiting those patterns, but transforming them into landscapes. And the shift of these patterns from something domestic and decorative and really small in a scale, idea of becoming a landscape really was interesting to me conceptually, sort of constructing this new space in my own head of a space of belonging. And accidents of crumbling paper of these patterns in a studio space also point to how sometimes unexpected discoveries really lead to something exciting. As I was ready to throw away some of these prints, I really was kind of became intrigued by the way folds were building this new landscape and patterns again that were familiar from landscapes. So I took that further and built these larger constructed landscapes out of small folded pieces of paper that carried ethnic Serbian patterns on them. This was exhibition in Akron Art Museum with Matthew Kaloje, Andrea Yoki. It was really a wonderful exhibition. I did few other installations based on the same concept because it was something that I had to explore further. This was one exhibition. I traveled to Bosnia for first time and took rolls of paper where I drew a whole design on. This is not always the case, but sometimes preparing full layout is really essential. So having these rolls on with me, I brought them in the space. This was cultural center of Trebinje in Bosnia, and then laid them out on a gallery wall. What had then what goes, I cut out all the shapes. It's very physical process of kind of removing all the stencils from and rubbing the charcoal in. And then they had this great photographer on the side who took these fancy black and white photos of the process. But this was one of the installations I really enjoyed as finished. It was intense and very time consuming, but kind of reflected landscape that this drawing was actually in, which was very mountainous and kind of interesting connections that came out of that. After that, probably largest installation was at the Binghamton University, where I also took the crochet from my grandmother and was folding them very specifically, building this long folded landscape like narrative. And I was becoming a little more intentional and precise how photography impacts and shadows and lighting impacted the work. I love working on different scales. Usually after large work, I really enjoy going back to studio, working on smaller work as sort of decompressing and working faster. These little pieces really I worked on them quite rapidly during pandemic time because it was easy and convenient. And I was thinking of patterns, I was thinking of proximities and relationships between the fragments in the work. And then the move to my new studio space in 3 years ago was probably the largest shift in, I would say, past 20 years. Formally, conceptually, as the work always comes from my relationship to space and location. This new space now is a home-based studio space. It's in my basement. It's much smaller than the previous space, but it's very functional. And you see here sort of like dirty and clean version. As I have studio visits, I would really work and kind of clean it up, but I can allow myself to really get messy and work on different scales. And it's really great studio space. I have small couch for staring. That's really essential. So what happened in the new studio space was a shift visually, conceptually. My father passed away year, maybe less than a year before this, and this really was time of coping for me. I was just working on small scale and trying to not think that much. I was picking of elements from surrounding environment, going into walks, thinking really of mortality and revisiting these old drawings and drawing over them, actually painting over the old drawings was kind of discovery, as it always happens with something you do without thinking, like, oh, but this is interesting. And the color started becoming really fascination. Color is extremely complex to me, and I still am heavily involved in kind of trying to learn color. But these environments also was very liberating for me to kind of step out of myself and really just be in the landscape. And I live on the edge of beautiful, large Mill Creek Park, where on a daily walks I take photos, and I started really noticing and enjoying, kind of paying attention to lights and darks, and there's just a simple available beauty. There was this abundance of beauty that I really was drawn to and wanted to bring into my studio space through color and form and shape. So, this was first time when I started to think color as a drawing. And I resisted color for many years because I'm just not interested in a surface, color as a surface. But here, color was used kind of structurally. And I was finding ways to incorporate drawing with the painting. And these really are built slowly, just as drawing is, as mark by mark and color by color. A lot of times, mixing color would look one way, and then putting it up on a painting would be like, oh, it's not pink, it's actually orange or green. Colors shift all the time. So I was very fascinated and still am intrigued by the complexity of color and the way some works are kind of pushed pretty far, trying to explore building up the marks through the relationships to paintings that got really loud. We're just trying to resolve and learn the color. These small fragments of larger paintings are usually the compositions I like the most, and I try to go back to simplifying colors. And this is where limited color was kind of intentional choice to really intentionally limit so I can control better the sense of space. The return to observation was again really big shift. I started to think about time as a cinematic time and really was drawn to these horizontal painting formats where underlying image was recognizable enough to pull you in, but then also thinking of digital language of swiping and scrolling and zooming in, and just the way we interact today with images in a digital culture, and sort of collaging these realities was kind of fascinating, and still is something that I'm working on currently on. So basically, I would now intentionally going look for these landscapes, and I really trust myself in this process now to find landscape and space that just speaks to me, and I take a lot of photos, bring them in. I manipulate them a little bit digitally in the colors and contrasts, and then they start kind of with the layers of drawing first on the canvas and then slowly building up the colors. This painting was probably one that took longest of all because I thought it was finished. It started again with a landscape, and these are stages that you can see of sort of looking through them. And I take these photos because I go to sleep and I look at them before I go to bed. When I eat, I like to glimpse at them and think about them between, and then slowly build up the marks. And this brings me to painting that's currently in the shared state. It's forest, and I'm really thinking now of forest as a metaphoric frame structure for the body of work, as a space that's really comforting, but also very disorienting space that's kind of sublime and beautiful, but also terrifying in many ways, that you don't have the sense of direction in, and where your really whole body, all senses get activated. So I was looking at a larger scale for this particular piece, as really trying to immerse myself into the process. And this is painting you will see if you visit the exhibition. There are obviously these flat painterly marks that resemble kind of like digital language. And this is something I'm very much drawn into right now, and really thinking of painting as coexisting realities, kind of these layered spaces that are deeply psychological, but also ability to bring them straight from my backyard, literally from the walk that I took yesterday or the same day, is really refreshing. Kind of responding, everything becomes a doorway. Everything is relevant, and I'm enjoying this kind of spontaneity in it, that sometimes it's a branch or a rock or tree or river that I can just look at and find relationships that are enough to prompt interesting composition. And then really a whole new space, whole new process starts in a studio, where with the colors and all these brushing down the image. I work with tempera. That's important to say. Tempera became kind of a substitute for charcoal, I would think, in a painting way, because tempera is very unstable, and usually first layer, I just use tempera. I drove it marks quickly and kind of just to establish that composition. As it dries, I can come back with water and I spray the surface and then start brushing slowly. And this is exciting stage where I control what can dissolve fully and what can stay in a little more present shape. And then, after color, after tempera is dries, I have to fix it. So there are a lot of testing and really working with materials that would allow me to stabilize these surfaces. I'm varnishing them and then coming back to the surface with acrylics as a top layers. These are some sketches that I'm working on now. Actually, I started using Procreate because I teach online too, like color theory and for graphic design students. And this sort of opened up the possibility to take the images and really fragment them and manipulate colors and sort of really bring these as a digital sketches as a potential. So that's something I'm planning to work on this summer. And right now, what's in my studio space is this painting, actually right behind me, you can see here, is the first layer that came from this forest image, and just is in this first stage, still just being brushed. I varnished it, and now it's ready for color elements to come on top. I also work at the school studio on a larger scale because my studio here doesn't fit larger scale. And this is interesting return, almost like thinking about painting back to like Renaissance and depth of field and illusion, just embracing that kind of romantic notion of painting as poetic space that you can move through and navigate. This is what's waiting for me at that studio space right now. It's also just ready for new layers to come in. Um, that's all I have to share with you. So I really thank you for your attention, and I'll just leave it up to questions if there are any.
Yeah, folks, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. Dragana, it strikes me that you leave a lot of space for your mind to create connections. So you talk a lot about the importance of staring. You talk a lot about the importance of like when you know you're about to go close up shop for the evening, go to bed, you look at a particular piece. Can you talk about how you learned that importance and established that practice and what it is bore out for you?
Thank you for that question. That is something I think that I had to learn. I don't think it comes with from for early young artists. I do think that graduate school really embedded strong sense of kind of just experience of making a lot of work that I don't care so much about now or that was really resolved, but the time that allowed me to go through a lot of testing and failing to point where you really learn that you can't fail if you stay with the work, if I look closely enough, if I give myself time to reflect and observe. So I really do think of observing and kind of staring in front of the painting as 50% at least, if not more, in the process of working. It does bring this important aspect of trust, which I think, is conceptually connected to latest work in a way that I think now the reason I'm working on embracing this immediate environment and just kind of trusting those images that I start with that will completely transform, something new will come and will not be about this original landscape, is the sense of uncertainty. It really is about this uncertainty that I am not just embracing, but really insisting on, that want to preserve and insist on my own ability to recognize and trust and be able to shift. And sort of that's why a lot of works, sometimes are extremely colorful, even though I went for very contemplative and I had in my mind, image that I was hoping to get. But the work kind of takes me on these journeys that are completely unpredictable. And that really is reason why I work as what keeps me going back to studio and being deeply engaged and I learn about myself. I think painting really gives back just as much as I'm putting onto it. It sort of speaks back. So this dialogue of trust, I think in our time of technology and possibilities or so much that can be instantaneous and really interesting visually, maybe like AI paintings, whatever. I just resist that so badly because I'm trusting my own intuition and I'm sort of like fighting for it. And I think the studio space is my space, only space where I have complete freedom to do that, to really be comfortable in this state of uncertainty. I hope that answers question. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I also noticed in seeing your earlier work, it's so incredible to see essentially the beginning of this really clear artistic voice start with the shadow. So like you had a levitating green object that you dropped in this soft gray and it gave weight and place to that green blob. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about how first it was casting shadow and then it became motion with the pulling of it, because then you're describing movement, not just shadow. And so, how you are describing both, but they're really different. Can you chat more about that?
Sure. I mean, that discovery, you're so right. The moment you're remembering back in from grad school on perception is was this important moment of recognizing that the narrative or something that we carry inside ourselves, or like want the content that we want to get out, whatever that is, really comes from the materials and how, and it happened again in the grad school where materiality was big new awareness, and how to embed these ideas of displacement or questions of belonging, things that I cared about, into the materials. Um, but touches about what we just talked about in a studio experimentation with placement of minimal elements. I was able to really play with and think of that very closely about proximities between the marks. Um, yeah, there is so much like to talk about that. Thinking of painting as abstraction and representation is something that ties into this question, I think, because it's simultaneous awareness and equal awareness of surface with illusion. So when that happened with the small marks on a paper, really on a small scale, and grew through these installations and larger scales, the formal exploration of edge, formal exploration of shadow and light, absolutely, and the perspective, all these really art elements that students learn early in education are extremely still essential to me, and I just don't think about them so much in that formalist way, but they're constantly present, like how soft something will just be brushed down and be pushed like immediately into the depth of space, or how like sharp edges can really pop up. There was this like formal investigation that I think through this relationship I found for first time in wall drawings. It was the synthesis really between the materials, the process, and the concept of detachment, the process of time and a shift. With these latest works, like shifting is very obvious, where I'm pushing it very far to point where it's not just blurry and soft, but it's kind of creating this sense of speed and actual time that's kind of captured in. And it's just intriguing to me that painting is so stubbornly singular. And I love that about painting being object in front of us, but still kind of stimulating your whole senses and making you really think of what's behind or maybe what's coming in the front. Um, so, it is this formal process that I enjoy very much, constantly questioning and thinking about, but it also is kind of giving bigger maybe points on culture we live in and the time, how we experience the sense of time as a fragmented, as unfinished, again, incomplete. And my hope, not that I have this big objective, like I want everyone to slow down, and because I'm kind of forcing you not to slow down or like to, but there is need to slow down and to stop and recognize the moments. So it's this dichotomy between the extreme speed and the slowness that is really exciting to me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I 100% see that kind of progression and at first the illusion of space and depth, like really like hammering in on that. And now that I love that transition into now it's not just the illusion of depth and space, it's the illusion of time, and or loss of time. And so I'm curious, the idea of this exhibition, Shared State, is placing you up next to an artist to be in conversation with, and you are in conversation with Dayton artist Laura Truitt. Um, Tell us what you feel about that and what you experienced when you saw everything installed. How was that for you?
I just was really appreciative, loved first learning about Lauren's work. I was first surprised at how I wasn't aware of it. Something about this exhibition was incredible, like making me realize, wow, Ohio is this big state. And there are like a lot of artists that I didn't know closely about. Some names I knew, but Lauren's work, when I saw the relationship, we really share this same interest in landscape being captured and examined in a state of flux and construction and kind of building up the idea of time and stability in a space that's really kind of challenged and unstable. So these dichotomies between landscape and architecture and stable, unstable, and then physical mark making and surface with a sense of impalpable sense of time. I think we both share those interests. And I really love the way space between the works is kind of now stimulated. So that was something, coming in, that's what scale does, and why exhibition spaces and really coming and seeing in person just can never be replaced. There was amazing kind of, I was struck by that presence of works in the actual gallery space. So yeah, it was very inspiring.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so neat to see two essentially landscape artists speak in such different languages, but have such an impact and that conversation across a room from each other, just really brilliant. Um, there's another thing that is kind of pervasive in the show, and that's this kind of edging on unease in a lot of the works, like that many of the artists are pushing uh, for not comfort within in their work, for folks to question. And so I would love for you to reflect on that and what you experienced within the show and why it's important to be a part of it.
Oh yeah, this would be amazing, like panel discussion. Maybe I would love to talk to. I mean, I talked to many artists at the opening and really left with this like my mind, was pulsing for days after with conversations. But it was really obvious, like what you just said, that there was this curiosity and questioning behind every work, while all artists have, really hard draftsmen and kind of strong, really committed to their own materials. There was a constant pushing and questioning what if, I feel like we all are asking that question, like what if, this exhibition gave us that chance to kind of extend and push beyond for everyone. It seemed like everybody I talked to, they did something slightly different and, different and larger scale. I think it just points to the need for all of us. I think a lot of contemporary artists, and for me as a teacher, as educator, I talk about this with students a lot. That I think I deeply believe it, we are equipped with what it takes, that, it is, in you, that you have these eyes and these hands, and, that we can perceive like millions of different shades of colors. And there is again this need to trust yourself while we are obviously reflecting on the culture and time we live in. I think this show, why for me it was so powerful, is that it had this incredible physicality to it, and curiosity that kind of drives every work. That's, I think, essential to not be kind of in the same place, but kind of keep pushing and keep exploring. Even if, if commercially driven, this is whole other topic. It's, art practice or like working professionally, obviously consistency is important. But I think all artists in this show kind of insist in that personal um, discoveries that drive, and then all the other stuff like, professional, commercial success, whatever that is, comes afterwards. So I think that's amazing to see. I really was so deeply moved by that, and just awareness that these artists live in my close proximity in this. So I think Ohio is awesome. I love my life in Ohio.
Great. And so this will be my last question. We've seen the journey thus far. Is there anything that you're really excited about that's coming up that we should know about?
I'm exciting for this painting that's now at in a Rife Gallery. It will travel down to Richmond, Virginia, where I finished my grad school, and it was accepted in this Capital Prize exhibition that is for VCU alumni students. And I'm really excited for that because it's gonna be in an environment that's familiar but really changed since I left. And just going back, I think will be meaningful. I'm very excited for this summer to just be in my studio. Super excited for next week. Yes.
That sounds fantastic.
Mhm.
Dragana, thank you again for the generosity of your time and talent. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk as a part of our programming for Shared State. I'd like to give a special thank you to our curators, Jordan and Natalie, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.